Today I'm going to be reviewing and giving my impressions of Colossal Cave 3D, which is a new release in the early part of 2023. That being said, this game is an almost one-to-one remake of a much older game released way back in 1976. Since I'm going to spend some time talking about the history of the original game, what led up to this remake, and then talking about the remake itself, I'm going to split this video into different sections with timeline markers so you can hop around and listen and watch areas that are of interest to you. So like I mentioned, in 1976, a game was released called Colossal Cave. It was a text adventure game, which if you're not familiar with that, just imagine a blank screen with text on it, describing an environment and what is in that environment. Based on what you're told, you can make choices to go, say, north, south, east, west, or to pick up items and to use items with other things. For the most part, it's a choose your own adventure book, but in an interactive format. Colossal Cave became a very popular installment in these games. Among this crowd of players was Roberta Williams, who along with her husband Ken Williams would go on to eventually found Sierra Online into a gaming juggernaut. So the story goes that Roberta Williams got her hands on Colossal Cave, was playing it and fell in love with it, and somewhere along the way it had this epiphany that, hey, I think I could actually write my own games and have them be good stories. She was formerly a school teacher and kind of a creative mind, and her husband Ken was quite a successful programmer at that time. And so between the two of them, they had the creative aspect and the technological aspect down, and Sierra Online was born. So fast forward many years, where Ken and Roberta Williams have been happily retired for many years, stuck like all the rest of us in a global pandemic. Ken Williams gets bored, and his wife suggests that he writes a book maybe about the history of Sierra Online. And he does, and it actually turned out to be a wonderful read. But after the book, he got bored again, and Roberta said, well, why don't you look into new game creation technology and see if that can keep you occupied? And they decided they were going to make a visual and audio reimagining of Colossal Cave. Relatively early on, it was suggested to Ken Williams that the PC and console market is pretty saturated with games, but virtual reality is a relatively untapped market, and if they wanted their game to stand out, that might be a good way to do it as well. And this is important to mention because when you design a game for VR, you have to consider a lot of things. If you're having to render two eyes at once, it affects a lot of the decisions you'll make. Because of that, I wouldn't consider the visuals in Colossal Cave necessarily high-end, but especially in virtual reality, they still feel very immersive. You honestly don't pay attention too closely to the visuals not being AAA quality or anything of that nature. On a flat screen, which I didn't play, it might be more of an issue, but at least for me, I didn't find myself having the experience diluted at all by the visuals not being state-of-the-art. What was considered fine design sensibilities way back in 1976 does appear and feel quite antiquated here in modern times. And because of that, this game may only be for a certain audience, and there's nothing wrong with that. In a lot of ways, that's what I enjoyed most about this game. It's a very relaxed, easygoing experience. There's no one hopping out from each corner trying to shoot you, or you have to fast twitch to fire back. You explore a truly colossal feeling cave, especially in virtual reality, and you interact with your environments. The interface is very much a throwback to old Sierra sensibilities, to where you would right-click in order to change your interactive icons to walk or pick up or talk. In this case, I'm at a Quest 2. Squeeze the trigger, it would change between a hand icon or an eye icon. Trigger click, and it would tell me what's going on in the space or pick up whatever I pointed at. They're not really what I would call intuitive VR type controls, but they're approachable enough that it's easy for virtually anybody to grasp how to play the game. There's really solid and well done narration.
You're at the edge of a large underground reservoir. White mist fills the room and rises rapidly upward. The lake is fed by a stream, which tumbles out of an overhead hole in the wall and splashes noisily into the water somewhere within the mist. A huge green fierce dragon bars the way. Attack a dragon? With your bare hands? Someone reckless would try that.
Though I'm not a huge fan that if I think I'm looking at something else that I want to know if I get a description of, it might repeat the same long explanation of the environment you're in over and over again.
You find yourself in a pantry, apparently for a very large person. You find yourself in a pantry, apparently for a very large person. You see a cavernous room to the north. Brass lantern. It is now pitch dark. Lantern. If you proceed, you will most likely fall into a pit. The lantern is now lit.
There's really great atmospheric audio that really makes you feel like you're in the space. But surprisingly, it's actually really sparse on music itself. You'll maybe go into a new environment every now and then and get 15 or 20 seconds of music.
You're in the giant room. The ceiling is too high to see with your lamp.
Usually if classical type music that's probably open source, and then it'll fade down and you're back to just atmospherics. There's a really wonderful sense of scale and immersion in the game, again especially in VR, which was the way that I played it. They have released trailers for the upcoming PlayStation 2 VR version, and that does have slightly higher end visuals. That being said, like I mentioned earlier, you're not playing this game for the visuals itself, so I don't feel like the MetaQuest 2 graphics really detract from the experience in any meaningful way. The puzzles, for the most part, make really decent sense. There is a couple times where, after I did figure out the solution, I thought, oh, this is a little bit of a stretch. And there are times, admittedly, where you're just trying every item in your inventory to see if it happens to be the solution. But there's no extremely far stretches, at least that kept me busy for an ultra long time. The retro game mechanics are pretty endearing. Some of them are definitely downright outdated and probably shouldn't be included, or at least have the option to switch some of them off. For instance, in a lot of old games, if you used an item early on in your adventure, you might find hours down the road that you needed that item and there's no way to get any more of it. This new version of Colossal Cave 3D, just like its predecessor, does have these dead ends built in, and to me that's somewhat of a deterrent, as these games are all about exploration and experimentation, but if you're punishing the user for that, it's probably a mechanic that's best left out. While I do believe that this game is overall going to be pretty divisive in its audience, I think for a lot of players this is going to be right up their alley. And after a bit of time has elapsed, I'm probably going to revisit this game from the start and make sure this time not to use up the items so I can complete my journey. As long as you know what you're getting into as far as old school game mechanics and sensibilities, this is definitely a game I recommend and enjoyed my time with.
Colossal Cave, reimagined by Roberta Williams. The only way out is in.